The steam from the master bathroom mirror was the only thing clouding the perfection of their 5-year marriage. Or so Ethan thought, until the iPhone on the marble vanity lit up. It wasn't a frantic emergency call at midnight, but a single truncated notification from a name that shouldn't have been popping up after work hours. "I can still smell your perfume on my collar." The silence that followed the shower water turning off wasn't peace. It was the deafening sound of a life fracturing into two distinct timelines. Before the text, and the hell that was about to follow. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet devastation of secrets unraveling in the dark, stay with me for this story. The master bathroom of the penthouse smelled of eucalyptus and expensive humidity. It was a fabricated tropical climate in the middle of a freezing Seattle November. Ethan Caldwell stood by the vanity, the electric hum of his toothbrush, the only sound competing with the aggressive hiss of the rainfall shower behind the frosted glass door. Inside that glass box was Elena, his wife, the woman who had kissed him on the cheek 20 minutes ago and complained about her lower back hurting from the ergonomic chairs in boardroom B. Ethan spit into the sink and rinsed, reaching for a towel. His hand brushed against Elena's phone, resting face up on the cool marble counter. She usually kept it face down, a habit he had attributed to her hatred of screen glare at night. But tonight, she had been careless. Or perhaps just comfortable. The screen lit up. A single vibration buzzed against the stone. Ethan didn't mean to look. It was a reflex, a muscle memory born of 5 years of shared domesticity where privacy was respected but not guarded. He expected a notification from her assistant, or perhaps a reminder for her 6 a.m. spin class. The banner notification across the lock screen was stark against the black background. Sender: Julian, work. Message: I can't focus. I'm still tasting you. Did you delete the thread? The world didn't stop. The earth didn't shake. Instead, the air in the bathroom seemed to be sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum that pressed violently against Ethan's eardrums. He stared at the words, the pixels burning a hole through his retina. Julian Vance. The senior VP Elena complained about incessantly. The man she called an arrogant suit and a corporate climbing hack. The man Ethan had met twice at holiday parties. A man who had shaken Ethan's hand with a grip that was firm, dry, and entirely dismissive. I'm still tasting you. The visceral nature of the sentence made bile rise in Ethan's throat. It wasn't vague. It wasn't an emotional confession of love that could be debated. It was carnal. It was recent. Ethan's hand hovered over the phone. His fingers trembled, an involuntary spasm of shock. He wanted to smash it. He wanted to rip the glass door open and scream over the sound of the water. He wanted to demand, to know when, how, and why. But then, the water stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise. Ethan? Elena's voice came from behind the glass, muffled but casual. Did you see my specialized conditioner? I think the maid moved it. Ethan froze. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. If he confronted her now, naked and vulnerable, she would cry. She would beg. She would spin a narrative of stress and mistakes and moments of weakness. She was a PR director. Crisis management was her profession. She would manage this. She would manage him. He couldn't let her do that. Quickly, with a precision he didn't know he possessed, Ethan slid the phone back exactly 2 inches to the left. aligning it with the edge of the soap dish where it had been. He turned on the faucet, splashing cold water onto his face to mask the flush of rage and the sheer terror of his reality collapsing. "Top shelf," Ethan said. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, hollow, metallic, but steady. "Behind the exfoliant." "Ah, got it. Thanks, babe." The shower door opened. Steam billowed out, carrying the scent of her, the scent he had loved for half a decade. Elena stepped out, wrapping a white towel around her hair. She looked flushed, clean, and beautiful. She looked exactly like the woman who loved him. She hummed a low tune as she walked past him to the vanity. Ethan watched in the mirror as she picked up her phone. She didn't flinch. She simply unlocked it, her thumb moving in a blur. Swipe, tap, delete. She looked up, meeting his eyes in the mirror. She smiled, her face fresh and scrubbed of makeup. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head. "You look a little pale." Ethan gripped the edge of the sink, his knuckles turning white. He looked at the woman who had just erased the evidence of her betrayal with the same casual efficiency she used to order takeout. "Just a headache," Ethan lied, the first of many he knew he would have to tell. "Long day." "Come to bed," she said softly, touching his arm. Her skin was warm. "I'll rub your temples." The touch burned. It took every ounce of his willpower not to recoil. "In a minute," he said. He watched her walk into the bedroom, the sanctuary that was now a stage. He wasn't going to sleep on the floor. He wasn't going to leave. Not tonight. Tonight, he would lie next to her, and he would let the hatred sharpen his mind. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a war, and she didn't even know the enemy was in the room. The morning light in Seattle was never bright. It was a diffusion of gray that flattened everything it touched. At 6:30 a.m., the kitchen of the penthouse felt like an operating theater, cold, sterile, and blindingly white. Ethan stood in front of the espresso machine, watching the dark liquid stream into 2 ceramic mugs. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night lying rigid on his side of the California King mattress, listening to the rhythmic, peaceful breathing of the woman who had shattered his life 6 hours earlier. Every time she shifted in her sleep, every time her foot brushed his calf under the duvet, a fresh wave of nausea had rolled through him. Now, the routine was his armor. Grind the beans, tamp the grounds, steam the milk. It was a sequence of actions that required just enough focus to keep his hands from shaking. "God, that smells amazing." Elena walked into the kitchen. She was already dressed for work, wearing a sharp charcoal blazer and a silk blouse that cost more than his first car. She looked rested. There were no dark circles under her eyes, no trace of the guilt that was currently eating Ethan alive from the inside out. It was terrifying how normal she looked. "Double shot for you," Ethan said, sliding the mug across the quartz island. He didn't look at her face. He focused on the rim of the mug. "You have that strategy meeting today, right?" Elena took the coffee, blowing softly on the steam. "Yeah, the merger prep. It's going to be a nightmare. I probably won't be home until late." Late. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and loaded. Yesterday, late meant overtime. Today, late meant Julian. Ethan took a sip of his own coffee. It tasted like ash. "Is Julian running lead on that?" He said the name carefully, testing the weight of it on his tongue, watching her peripheral vision. He wanted to see a flinch, a pause, a dilation of the pupils, anything that proved she had a conscience. Elena didn't blink. She took a sip of her coffee and leaned casually against the counter, scrolling through her iPad. Unfortunately, he's been writing me about the press release drafts all week. The guy is a control freak. She said it with such casual annoyance, such perfect professional disdain. If Ethan hadn't seen the text, "I'm still tasting you," he would have believed her completely. She wasn't just lying. She was constructing a parallel reality where Julian was an antagonist, not a lover. It was a masterclass in manipulation. "Maybe you should transfer to a different project," Ethan suggested, his voice low. "If he's that difficult." Elena looked up then, her eyes narrowing slightly. For a second, Ethan thought he had pushed too far. "And let him take credit for 6 months of my work? No way. I can handle Julian." "I bet you can," Ethan thought, the venom almost slipping out. He turned away, opening the refrigerator to grab the almond milk, needing a moment to recompose his features. "Just don't let the stress get to you. You've seemed distracted lately." "I'm fine, Ethan. Really." She set her mug down, the ceramic clicking sharply against the stone. She checked her watch. "I have to run. My Uber is 2 minutes away." She walked around the island. This was the moment. The morning ritual. The goodbye kiss. Ethan braced himself. He felt her approach. The scent of her perfume, Santal 33, invading his space. It was the same perfume Julian had mentioned. The scent that was currently on another man's collar. Elena leaned in and pecked him on the lips. It was quick, dry, and habitual. "Love you. Dinner's in the fridge if I'm not back by 7. "Love you," Ethan said. The words felt like broken glass in his throat. He watched her walk to the elevator. She checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, straightened her blazer, and typed something on her phone. A smile touched her lips. A small, private smile that she quickly suppressed before the elevator doors slid open. The doors closed, sealing her away. Ethan stood alone in the silence of the $1,000,000 apartment. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the silence of a crime scene. He looked at her half-finished coffee cup, the lipstick stain on the rim a perfect shade of coral. He walked over to the sink and poured the rest of her coffee down the drain. He watched the brown liquid swirl away, disappearing into the dark plumbing. He couldn't do this. He couldn't play house with a ghost. But he had to. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and opened his calendar. He didn't go to work today. He had sick days saved up. Today, he wasn't an architect. Today, he was an archaeologist, and he was going to dig through the ruins of his marriage until he found the bones. Ethan walked into the living room and opened his laptop. He logged into their shared cloud account, his fingers flying across the keys. The masquerade had begun, and he was going to make sure he was the one wearing the final mask. The home office was a glass-walled enclosure off the main living area, designed by Ethan to maximize natural light. Today, however, the gray Seattle overcast made the room feel like a sterile containment unit. Ethan sat at his desk, the ergonomic mesh chair providing no comfort to his rigid spine. On the dual monitors before him, the Caldwell family finances were spread out like a cadaver ready for autopsy. Ethan was an architect. He understood structures. He knew that for a building to stand, the foundation had to be solid. For a lie to stand, the paper trail had to be buried. Elena was brilliant at public relations. Spinning narratives was her trade. But she was also arrogant. She believed that because Ethan trusted her, he would never look down. He started with the joint American Express Platinum account. At first glance, everything appeared mundane. Whole Foods runs, Uber rides, a subscription to the New Yorker, her Pilates membership. But Ethan wasn't looking for the mundane. He was looking for the anomalies in the pattern. He scrolled back 3 months, then 6. He stopped at an entry from May 12th, 14th. The Ritz-Carlton, Half Moon Bay. Ethan frowned. He remembered May. Elena had told him she was at a tech summit in San Francisco, staying at the W Hotel near the convention center. Half Moon Bay was 45 minutes south, a romantic, secluded coastal retreat. It made no sense for a corporate summit. He cross-referenced the date with his own calendar. May 12th. Elena. Keynote prep. He remembered FaceTiming her that night. She had been wearing a hotel robe, the background a nondescript beige wall. She had said the signal was bad and cut the call short. Ethan's chest tightened, a cold pressure clamping down on his lungs. He opened a new folder on his encrypted external hard drive. He named it simply Case File. He took a screenshot of the charge and dragged it into the folder. Next, he pulled up the Verizon bill. They shared a family plan to save data costs, a practical decision made years ago. Elena managed the utility bills, so Ethan rarely looked at the detailed breakdown. He logged into the carrier's portal, guessing her password on the second try. It was her mother's birthday combined with the year they bought the penthouse. Sentimental, he thought bitterly. He downloaded the PDF for the last billing cycle and hit Ctrl+F. He searched for the number he had seen on her screen last night. He didn't have the number, only the name Julian. But he knew the timing. Last night. 11:42 p.m. He scanned the data logs. Nothing. No text messages at that time. Ethan paused, his mind racing. He had seen the text. It existed. If it wasn't on the bill, it wasn't an SMS. It was iMessage or WhatsApp or Signal, apps that used data, bypassing the carrier's itemized text log. But then he noticed something else. Under the list of devices, there was the iPhone 15 Pro Max, Elena's current phone. And then, buried at the bottom of the connected devices list, was an iPad mini with its own cellular data line. Data usage, 45 GB. Elena didn't use an iPad mini. She used a MacBook Air for work and a Kindle for reading. They didn't even own an iPad mini. Ethan stared at the line item. The device had been added to their plan 8 months ago. The billing address for the device wasn't the penthouse. It was a P.O. box in Bellevue. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. She had a second device, a portal to her other life. She likely kept it at the office, or in her car, or... He remembered the gym bag she kept by the door, the one she took to her early spin classes. She never let him unpack it. Ethan stood up, his chair rolling back silently on the hardwood. He walked out of the office and into the foyer. The bag wasn't there. She had taken it with her. Of course. He went back to the desk and sat down. He didn't need the physical device yet. The data usage spikes told a story of their own. High usage late at night. High usage on weekends when she was working from home in the guest room. He took another screenshot. The pain was different now. It wasn't the sharp, hot shock of last night. It was a dull, heavy ache, like a bone setting improperly. But alongside the pain, a cold clarity was forming. He wasn't just a husband anymore. He was an adversary. He opened the case file folder. 2 files. It wasn't enough to destroy her, but it was enough to start the demolition. His phone buzzed on the desk, startling him. Elena. Meeting ran long, grabbing lunch with the team. How's your head? Ethan stared at the message. The concern felt performative, a calculated breadcrumb to keep him docile. He typed back, his fingers moving steadily. Ethan. Better. Just resting. Take your time. He hit send. Then, he opened a new browser tab and searched for Julian Vance on LinkedIn. The face that stared back was handsome in a generic, polished way. Perfect teeth, confident smirk, head of strategic partnerships. Ethan studied the face of the man who was tasting his wife. He memorized the jawline, the eyes. I'm going to ruin you, Ethan whispered to the empty room. Both of you. He clicked save on the LinkedIn profile photo and dragged it into the folder. The dining room table was set with the precision of a surgical tray. Crisp linen napkins, polished silverware that gleamed under the dim pendant lights, and a centerpiece of white hydrangeas that Ethan had arranged himself. Every element screamed domestic perfection, a stage set for a play Ethan no longer wanted to star in. Can you open the Pinot Noir? Elena called from the kitchen. She sounded breathless, excited. The 2018 vintage. It breathes better. Ethan stood by the sideboard, gripping the neck of the bottle. It breathes better. He wondered if Julian had taught her that. Elena had never cared about wine varietals until 6 months ago. Now she had opinions on tannins and terroir. The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that cut through the low jazz playing on the Sonos speakers. I'll get it, Ethan said. He walked down the hallway, the hardwood floor cool saw beneath his feet. He composed his face, smoothing out the lines of tension around his eyes. He unlocked the door and pulled it open. Julian Vance stood there. He looked exactly like his LinkedIn photo, only more vibrant, more tangible. He was taller than Ethan expected, wearing a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, the top button undone to suggest calculated casualness. He held a bottle of wine in one hand and offered a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ethan, right? Julian said, extending a hand. Good to finally meet the man behind the myths. Elena talks about you constantly. Ethan took the hand. It was warm and dry. The grip was firm, an alpha handshake designed to establish dominance. Ethan squeezed back, just hard enough to register resistance. All good things, I hope, Ethan said. Ideally, he would have slammed the door in Julian's face. Instead, he stepped back, ushering the wolf into the fold. Come in. Elena is in the kitchen. Great place, Julian said, stepping inside and scanning the open-concept living area. His eyes lingered on the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rainy Seattle skyline. You designed the interior landscape too, right? The integration of the indoor plants is very organic. It helps with the air quality, Ethan said flatly. Keeps things clean. Elena emerged from the kitchen, carrying a platter of bruschetta. When she saw Julian, her entire posture shifted. It was subtle, a slight straightening of the spine, a brightness in the eyes that hadn't been there when she looked at Ethan 5 minutes ago. Julian, you made it through the traffic, she said. She didn't hug him. She didn't kiss his cheek. She stayed a careful 3 feet away, but the air between them crackled with an electricity that made the hair on Ethan's arms stand up. Barely, Julian laughed. I almost abandoned the car and swam. They moved to the dining table. The 4th chair remained empty. They were supposed to be joined by another couple, But a last-minute cancellation had turned this into an intimate trio, a triangle. Dinner was a torture of small talk and clinking cutlery. Ethan sat at the head of the table, watching them. They were careful. They didn't touch. They didn't use pet names. They spoke about quarterly projections, media buys, and the upcoming merger. But Ethan saw the code. He saw the way Julian's foot pointed toward Elena under the table. He saw the way Elena laughed a little too loudly at Julian's mediocre jokes. He saw the way their eyes met for a fraction of a second too long whenever Ethan looked down at his plate. It was a silent language of intimacy, forged in hotel rooms and stolen lunch breaks. "So, Ethan," Julian said, swirling his wine, "Elena tells me you've never been to the Bay Area office. We should get you down there. The campus is incredible." Ethan looked up, cutting a piece of steak with deliberate slowness. "I'm not much for corporate campuses. I prefer the coast. Elena and I have been meaning to go back to Half Moon Bay. She said the weather was terrible when she was there in May, though." The silence that followed lasted less than a second, but to Ethan, it was an eternity. Elena froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Julian's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flickered to Elena and back to Ethan, a microscopic check-in. "Right," Julian said smoothly. "The fog in May is brutal. We spent most of that summit inside the conference hall anyway. Didn't see much of the ocean." "Shame," Ethan said, taking a sip of his wine. He looked directly at his wife. "You never mentioned the fog, Elle. I thought you said you stayed in the city." Elena set her fork down. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, likely from the wine, but her eyes were sharp. "We did stay in the city, Ethan. Julian is talking about the off-site day we did. I told you about that." "Must have slipped my mind," Ethan said lightly. "Pass the salt, please." He watched the tension drain from Elena's shoulders, watched the covert look of relief she shot Julian. They thought they had navigated the minefield. They thought he was forgetful. But Ethan wasn't forgetful. He was just patient. As the dinner wound down, Julian stood up to use the restroom. "Down the hall, second door on the left?" "That's the one," Ethan said. As Julian walked away, Ethan noticed he left his phone on the table. Face down. Ethan looked at Elena. She was busy clearing the plates, her back to him. "I'll help with the dishes," Ethan said, standing up. He walked past Julian's chair. In one fluid motion, he knocked a napkin off the table. As he bent to retrieve it, his eyes scanned the back of Julian's phone case. It was distinctive, a textured leather with a small silver monogram. JV. Ethan picked up the napkin. He stood up. "You're such a good host," Elena said, turning around with a stack of dirty plates. She smiled at him, a genuine, grateful smile. She truly believed everything was fine. "I try," Ethan said. He listened to the toilet flush down the hall. Julian would be back in moments. The invader was still in the house. But Ethan had what he needed. He had seen the fear in their eyes when he mentioned Half Moon Bay. It wasn't just a physical affair. They were colluding to protect it. They were partners. And that meant he could destroy them both. The coffee shop was located in Queen Anne, far enough from their downtown penthouse that the risk of running into a mutual acquaintance was statistically zero. It smelled of burnt roast and rain-dampened wool. Ethan sat at a small corner table, the screen of his laptop angled away from the room. He wasn't using his work computer, nor the sleek MacBook they shared at home. This was a cheap Chromebook he had purchased with cash 2 days ago at a pawn shop in Georgetown. He took a sip of black coffee. It was bitter, grounding him in the reality of what he was about to do. On the screen, Two windows were open. The first was his bank's portal. For the last 48 hours, Ethan had been methodically untangling their financial lives. It was a slow process to avoid triggering fraud alerts. He moved his personal inheritance, his bonuses, and the liquid assets from his solo projects into a new high-yield savings account under a trust he had established yesterday. He typed in the final transfer amount. Click. The balance in their joint checking account dropped significantly. It wasn't empty, he wasn't reckless, but it was light. Enough to cover the mortgage and bills, but not enough for a sudden exit strategy. If Elena wanted to leave him, she would have to do it on her own dime. He closed the banking tab and opened the browser. He navigated to a secure, encrypted email service that routed through 3 different foreign servers. The recipient field was already filled. He had spent the morning gathering the email addresses. The chief compliance officer at Elena's tech firm, the head of HR, and 2 members of the board of directors. Subject: compliance violation, law. Misuse of company funds. Urgent. Ethan stared at the cursor blinking on the white page. He didn't write a long, emotional diatribe. He didn't mention broken hearts or ruined marriages. He wrote like a corporate whistleblower. To the compliance committee, attached are financial records indicating a pattern of misuse of corporate travel funds by Senior VP Julian Vance and Director Elena Caldwell. Specifically, expenses logged as client acquisition trips to San Francisco, May 12-14th, which coincide with personal charges at luxury resorts in Half Moon Bay, unrelated to company business. Furthermore, there is a concern regarding an undisclosed relationship between the 2 parties that poses a direct conflict of interest regarding the upcoming merger strategy. Please review the attached evidence. He dragged the files into the attachment box. The receipt from the Ritz-Carlton, the cross-referenced calendar dates, the photo of them standing too close at the company retreat, a photo he had found on a colleague's public Instagram, innocent to the naked eye but damning in this context. He wasn't destroying them with rumors. He was destroying them with policy. Corporate America didn't care about adultery, but it cared deeply about embezzlement and liability. Julian Vance was in charge of the budget. Elena was in charge of the image. This accusation, launched right before the merger, would be radioactive. Ethan hovered his finger over the trackpad. He thought of Elena's laugh. He thought of the way she used to look at him before the phone started lighting up at midnight. He thought of Julian's hand gripping his at the front door, the arrogance of a man who thought he had won. Ethan pressed send. The screen refreshed. Message sent. He closed the laptop, wiped the keyboard with a napkin, and slid it into his backpack. He stood up, throwing his empty cup into the recycling bin. When he returned to the penthouse an hour later, Elena was on the sofa, surrounded by binders. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. "Hey," she said, looking up. "Where were you? I tried to call." "Just needed some air," Ethan said, hanging his coat in the closet. "Went for a walk." "I'm drowning," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "Julian is changing the slide deck again. I have to present this to the board on Friday. If this merger doesn't go through, heads are going to roll." Ethan walked over to the sofa. He stood behind her and placed his hands on her shoulders. He felt the tension in her muscles, the stress radiating off her like heat. "You'll do great," Ethan said softly, his thumbs digging into the knots in her neck. "You always handle the pressure. Just focus on the facts." "I hope so," she whispered, leaning back into his touch. "I just need this week to be over." It will be, Ethan promised. It will all be over soon. He looked out the window at the gray city. The email was already in the server. The investigation would start Monday morning. The bomb was under the table, and he was the only one who could hear the ticking. Sunday night descended on the city like a heavy, wet blanket. Inside the penthouse, the air was thick with a performative coziness that made Ethan's skin crawl. Elena had decided to cook, a rare occurrence that usually signaled guilt or a request for a favor. She moved around the kitchen in a slate-gray silk robe, pouring wine and humming softly, acting out a domestic fantasy that had ceased to exist days ago. Ethan sat on the sofa, a book open on his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. He was watching her reflection in the darkened window. "You've been so quiet all weekend," Elena said, bringing a glass of Cabernet over to him. She sat close, her thigh pressing against his. The heat of her skin felt like a brand. "Are you still mad about me working late on Friday?" Ethan looked at the wine, then at her. Her eyes were wide, soliciting, practiced. "I'm not mad, Elle," he said, his voice raspy. "I'm just drained. I think I'm coming down with that flu that's going around the office." Elena frowned, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You don't feel warm. Maybe it's stress. You get so moody when the weather turns. You pull away from me and it makes me feel like I'm doing something wrong." Ethan almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. She was gaslighting him, twisting his reaction to her betrayal into a character flaw of his own. "You get so moody," as if his withdrawal was a symptom of his neurosis, not a response to her infidelity. "I'm just tired," Ethan repeated, shifting away from her touch. "My stomach is in knots." "Let me take care of you," she whispered, leaning in to kiss his neck. Her hand moved to his chest, sliding under his shirt. "It's been weeks, Ethan. We need this. I need this." The scent of Santal 33 filled his nose. It triggered a visceral gag reflex. He imagined Julian's hands on her, Julian's text message, the tasting she had allowed. Ethan stood up abruptly, the movement jarring the wine glass in her hand. A drop of red spilled onto the white rug. "I can't," he said, clutching his stomach. It wasn't entirely a lie. The nausea was real. "I'm going to take a NyQuil and pass out in the guest room. I don't want to get you sick before your big presentation." Elena stared at him, hurt flashing across her face, quickly replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "Fine. If you want to sulk, go ahead. I'm just trying to connect with my husband." "Good night, Elena," he said. He walked to the guest room, closing the door and locking it. He didn't take the medicine. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the apartment. An hour later, the main lights in the hallway went out. He heard the master bedroom door click shut. Ethan waited another 30 minutes. Then he moved. He crept back into the master bedroom. The room was dark, lit only by the ambient city glow. Elena was asleep, her breathing deep and rhythmic. Her phone was on the nightstand, charging wirelessly. Ethan picked it up. He didn't need to unlock it to see the notifications stacking up on the lock screen. "Julian, work. Did you see the email from compliance? It went to my spam folder, but I just saw it." "Julian, work. Elena, pick up." "Julian, work. Why are you radio silent? We need to talk. Now." Ethan's heart hammered. The email had gone out. The fuse was lit, and Julian was panicking. Ethan looked at the sleeping form of his wife. She looked peaceful, oblivious to the fact that her lover was currently spiraling. If Elena woke up and saw these, she would call him. They would coordinate. They would come up with a lie to cover the expense reports. They would spin the narrative. Ethan couldn't let that happen. He needed them isolated. He needed Julian to feel abandoned. He needed Elena to be blindsided. Ethan carefully unlocked the phone using her Face ID, angling it gently toward her sleeping face until the padlock icon snapped open. He opened the thread with Julian. He didn't reply. That would be too risky. Instead, he long pressed on the 3 frantic messages sent in the last hour. Delete, delete, delete. The thread was scrubbed clean of the panic. To Elena, when she woke up, it would look like Julian hadn't texted her at all. To Julian, it would look like Elena had read his desperate pleas and chosen to ignore them. Ethan placed the phone back on the charger. He looked at the notifications settings. He toggled Do Not Disturb on, ensuring that if Julian called in the middle of the night, the phone wouldn't light up. He backed out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Tomorrow morning, Elena would walk into the office thinking it was a normal Monday. Julian would walk in thinking he had been betrayed by his partner in crime. The paranoia would be suffocating. Ethan returned to the guest bed. For the first time in a week, he closed his eyes and felt he might actually sleep. The house was quiet, but the storm had finally broken. The Seattle Art Museum was transformed into a cavern of shadows and golden light. Waiters in white jackets moved like ghosts through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne that sparkled under the high ceilings. It was the kind of event where the air conditioning was set too low, and the conversation was kept deliberately light to mask the weight of the net worth in the room. Ethan adjusted his tuxedo cuffs, feeling the cold metal of his cufflinks against his wrist. Beside him, Elena was a vision in emerald silk. She held her head high, her posture perfect, but Ethan could feel the tremor in her hand where it rested on his forearm. She was flying blind. For the last 4 days, Julian had been a ghost to her. Thanks to Ethan's intervention with her phone, she believed Julian was simply being cautious, adhering to a no-contact rule before the big night. She didn't know that Julian had been trying to reach her desperately, believing her silence was a calculated betrayal. She didn't know that compliance had seized Julian's work laptop that morning. "Relax," Ethan whispered, leaning close to her ear. "You look incredible. Just go in there and own the room." Elena offered a tight, brittle smile. "I just need to find the CEO. I need to make sure we're still good on the merger announcement sequence." They moved into the main hall. Usually, Elena would be greeted by a phalanx of junior executives and admirers. Tonight, the atmosphere was different. As they walked through the crowd, conversations seemed to stutter and die. Eyes darted toward them and then quickly away. It was the distinct, suffocating temperature of a scandal that had already broken. Ethan saw it before she did. Julian was standing near the open bar. He wasn't the polished executive who had come to dinner. His tie was loosened, his hair was unkempt, and his face was flushed with a dangerous mix of alcohol and adrenaline. He was holding a scotch glass with a grip that threatened to shatter the crystal. When he saw Elena, his expression shifted from misery to a sharp, focused hatred. "Ethan," Elena whispered, her grip on his arm tightening to the point of pain. "Why is Julian looking at me like that?" "I don't know," Ethan lied smoothly. "Maybe he's had too much to drink." Before she could steer them away, Julian pushed off the bar. He cut a straight line through the crowd, ignoring the colleagues who tried to intercept him. The low hum of the party began to drop into an expectant silence. "Elena," Julian said, His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It was thick with accusation. "Julian," Elena said, her voice dropping to a professional, warning hiss. "Not here. We can talk Monday." "Monday?" Julian let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "There is no Monday, Elena. Security escorted me out of the building at noon, but you knew that, didn't you?" Elena froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. "What? I didn't know. What are you talking about?" "Don't play the victim." Julian stepped closer, invading her personal space. Ethan felt the muscles in his back coil, ready to intervene, but he held his ground. "You're the only one who had the travel logs. You're the only one who could have sent those files to compliance. You cut a deal, didn't you? You threw me to the wolves to save your own promotion." The circle of silence around them widened. The CEO was watching from the mezzanine. The board of directors was watching. "Julian, you're drunk," Elena stammered, her eyes darting around the room, seeing the judgment on every face. "I never sent anything. I haven't even spoken to you all week." "Exactly," Julian shouted, and this time heads turned from every corner of the hall. "Radio silence. I texted you for 3 days begging for a heads up and you ghosted me. You deleted the threads and let me hang." Ethan stepped forward then, placing a protective hand on Elena's shoulder, a gesture that looked supportive to the crowd, but felt like a shackle to her. "Julian, that's enough," Ethan said, his voice calm, authoritative, the voice of a confused but protective husband. "I don't know what you think is going on between you and my wife, or what company politics you're playing, but you need to back off." Julian looked at Ethan, his eyes wild. Then he looked back at Elena. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he read it as guilt. "She's not who you think she is, buddy," Julian sneered, pointing a shaking finger at Elena. "Ask her about Half Moon Bay. Ask her whose room service bill she expensed." "Julian!" Elena shrieked, her composure finally shattering. Security materialized. 2 large men in black suits flanked Julian, taking him by the arms. "Get off me!" Julian spat. As they dragged him away, he kept his eyes locked on Elena. "I hope it was worth it, Elle. I hope the promotion keeps you warm." The doors closed behind him. The echo of his voice lingered in the cavernous room. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then, slowly, the murmurs started. 1,000 whispers hissing like steam escaping a valve. Elena stood trembling in the center of the ruin. She looked at the CEO on the balcony. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. He turned his back and walked away. Elena turned to Ethan, tears welling in her eyes, her hands reaching for him. "Ethan, I swear. He's crazy. I don't know what he's talking about. You have to believe me." Ethan looked down at her. He saw the terror. He saw the realization that her career was dead. "I believe you need to go home, Elena," Ethan said quietly. "I'll get the car." He didn't hold her hand as they walked to the exit. He walked a step ahead, leaving her to trail behind him in the wake of the whispers, alone in a room full of people. The ride home had been a suffocating vacuum of silence. Elena had wept softly against the passenger window, her breath fogging the glass, while Ethan drove with the steady, impassive hands of a chauffeur. When they entered the penthouse, the silence followed them in, heavier now, amplified by the vast, empty spaces Ethan had once designed to feel open and airy. Elena kicked off her heels near the foyer console. She didn't hang her coat. She let it slide off her shoulders onto the floor, a pool of emerald silk. She walked straight to the liquor cabinet and poured a glass of vodka, her hands shaking so badly the crystal decanter rattled against the glass. "He's ruined me," she whispered, taking a gulp that should have burned, but she didn't flinch. She turned to Ethan, her mascara smudged, her eyes wide with a desperate need for validation. "You saw him, Ethan. He was unhinged. He made all of that up because I wouldn't leave you for him. It was harassment. We can sue him for defamation." She was already spinning. Even in the wreckage, her instinct was to construct a story where she was the victim. Ethan didn't answer. He walked past her, down the hallway, and into the bedroom. "Ethan?" she called out, her voice rising in pitch. "Where are you going? We need to talk about a statement. If the press picks this up—" She followed him into the bedroom. She stopped in the doorway, the glass of vodka halfway to her mouth. Ethan had 2 suitcases open on the bed. One was already full. He was folding his gray wool sweaters with methodical precision. "What are you doing?" Elena asked. The spin died on her lips. A new, raw fear took its place. "I'm leaving, Elena," Ethan said. He didn't look up. He placed a stack of shirts next to the sweaters. "Leaving? Tonight?" "Ethan, stop!" She rushed forward, grabbing his arm. "You can't leave, not now. I just lost everything out there. Everyone was looking at me like I was a criminal. I need you." Ethan stopped. He looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at her face, searching for a trace of the woman he had married 5 years ago. He found only a stranger who was afraid of being alone with her own mess. He gently, but firmly, removed her hand. "You didn't lose everything because of Julian," Ethan said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "You lost it because you got careless." Elena blinked. "Careless? What are you talking about?" Ethan zipped the first suitcase. The sound was sharp, final. He turned to face her. "Last Tuesday," he said. "You were in the shower. You left your phone on the vanity. Face up." Elena's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The memory flickered behind her eyes. The steam, the rush, the moment she thought she had deleted the thread in time. "I saw the text, Elena. I'm still tasting you." The color drained from her face completely. She took a step back, hitting the edge of the dresser. "Ethan, it was a mistake. One time. It meant nothing." "It wasn't one time," Ethan corrected her. "It was Half Moon Bay in May. It was the frantic texts you sent him while I was sitting next to you on the couch. It was the iPad mini you hid in your gym bag." Elena stared at him. The realization hit her in waves. The lack of anger, the sudden flu, the questions about the merger. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew all week." "I knew," Ethan said. He picked up the second suitcase. "And I knew you would lie until the bitter end, so I didn't ask." "The email to compliance," she said, her voice trembling. "Julian said someone sent the travel logs. That was you?" "I just forwarded the truth," Ethan said. "You were the one who created the paper trail." "You destroyed my career," she screamed, the tears finally spilling over, hot and angry. "You let me walk into that gala knowing I was going to be slaughtered. Who does that? You're my husband." "And you were my wife," Ethan said. "But you fired me from that position a long time ago. You just forgot to tell me." He walked past her, the wheels of the suitcase gliding silently over the carpet. "Ethan, please," she sobbed, grabbing the door frame to block his exit. I can fix this. We can fix this. I'll quit. We can move. Don't leave me here alone. Ethan stopped one last time. He looked around the penthouse. The glass walls, the cold marble, the perfectly curated plants that needed so much care to survive in this artificial climate. It was a beautiful cage, and now it was hers. I'm not leaving you alone, Ethan said. You have Julian, or what's left of him. Ethan! He walked out of the bedroom, down the hall, and through the foyer. He didn't slam the front door. He closed it with a soft, decisive click. Inside, Elena stood in the center of the dark living room. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the city lights into streaks of distorted color. She looked at her reflection in the glass. A woman in a couture gown, holding a glass of vodka, standing in a house that was suddenly too big, too quiet, and entirely empty. The notification light on her phone blinked in the darkness. But for the first time in her life, she didn't reach for it.